The howling wind rattled the stage-coach windows as Tabitha Dawson clutched her leather-bound journal to her chest, her knuckles white with tension. The year was 1876, and the Colorado Rockies loomed before her like sentinels guarding the path to her new life, a life she desperately needed to begin. "Miss, I reckon we might have ourselves a problem," the driver called down, his voice nearly lost in the gathering storm. "Ordway's still a good day's journey, and this weather's turning fierce. Might be the mountain pass is already closing." Tabitha leaned forward, her heart sinking as she watched the first heavy snowflakes begin to fall. October had barely begun, but the mountains had their own calendar, one that paid no mind to the plans of those who dared to cross them. "How much farther until we know for certain?" she asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "Next trading post is about an hour ahead. Fellow there keeps tabs on the pass. If anyone knows, it'll be him." Tabitha nodded, settling back against the hard wooden seat. The stagecoach was empty save for her, and her two trunks, one filled with clothing, the other with books, papers, and the teaching supplies she'd need for her new position at the schoolhouse in Ordway. The position that was supposed to start in 3 days. The journey from Boston had already taken nearly 2 weeks, delayed by a broken axle in St. Louis and flooding along the Kansas trails. Now, with winter arriving early in the mountains, she feared what further delays might mean for her opportunity. The telegram had been clear: if she wasn't in Ordway by the 15th, they would offer the position to another candidate. As the stagecoach rocked and swayed along the increasingly treacherous mountain road, Tabitha opened her journal and reread the letter that had changed everything. Her sister's handwriting, once so elegant and precise, had grown shaky in her final months, but the words remained clear. "Come west, dearest Tabby. The air is clean, the skies endless. There is room to breathe here, room to begin anew. I may not see another spring, but you can live for us both." Eleanor had succumbed to consumption barely a month after Tabitha received the letter. Her brother-in-law's brief telegram had contained just 9 words. "Eleanor gone. Position at school still open. Condolences." The stagecoach lurched to a halt, jolting Tabitha from her memories. Outside, the snow was falling faster now, already beginning to blanket the ground. "Trading post ahead, Miss Dawson," the driver called. "Best come in while I ask about the pass." The trading post was little more than a sturdy log cabin with a broad porch and hitching posts. Inside, the warmth from a stone fireplace greeted them, along with the scents of coffee, tobacco, and leather. A grizzled man with a wild gray beard looked up from behind a rough-hewn counter. "Bit late in the season for travelers, Jenkins," the man said to the stagecoach driver. "Got a schoolteacher here bound for Ordway. What's the word on Eagle Pass?" The trading post owner's expression darkened. "Closed as of this morning. Avalanche took out part of the trail. Won't be passable till spring thaw." Tabitha felt the blood drain from her face. "Are you certain?" "Isn't there another route?" "None that a stagecoach could manage, madam. Not with winter setting in. You'd need to backtrack 200 miles to find another pass, and there's no guarantee that one's still open either." "But I must reach Ordway by the 15th, Tabitha insisted, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "I'm expected at the schoolhouse." The old man stroked his beard. "Ordway, you say? Well, there might be one way, though I wouldn't call it likely." He turned toward a man sitting alone by the fire, partially hidden in shadow. "Hey, McCullough, you still heading back to your place near Timber Creek today?" The figure by the fire stirred, and Tabitha found herself looking at a tall man dressed in worn buckskins and a heavy wool coat. He stood, revealing broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, startlingly blue beneath the brim of his hat, assessed her quickly. "I am," he said, his voice deep and graveled. "Why do you ask? This lady needs to get to Ordway. Thought you might point her to a route, seeing as your place sits between here and there." The man called McCullough shook his head. "No routes open now. Storm's only getting worse." He glanced toward the windows, where snow was already piling against the glass. "Be suicide to try Eagle Pass tonight, please," Tabitha said, stepping forward. "I'm to be the new teacher in Ordway. If I don't arrive by the 15th, they'll give the position to someone else." McCullough studied her for a long moment. "It's the 10th today. Pass won't clear before spring." "April, most likely." "April." Tabitha felt her knees weaken. "But that's 6 months from now." "That's mountain weather, madam." He turned to go. "Wait," she called after him. "Perhaps you could guide me through." "I understand there's danger, but surely with someone who knows the way, no one's crossing that pass now," McCullough interrupted firmly. "Not even locals." The trading post owner cleared his throat. "Mitch, your cabin's the closest thing to shelter between here and Timber Creek." "Lady can't stay here. I'm heading down to Denver tomorrow myself before the lower roads close." McCullough's jaw tightened. "My place isn't set up for guests." "I wouldn't be any trouble," Tabitha said quickly, "if I could just stay until I can figure something out." "Figure what out?" "There's nothing to figure. Pass is closed." McCullough's voice had an edge of finality to it. The stagecoach driver, who had been warming his hands by the fire, spoke up. "Mitchell McCullough, you gonna leave a lady stranded in a mountain blizzard? Your pa would roll over in his grave." A muscle twitched in McCullough's cheek. He looked from the driver to Tabitha, taking in her city clothes, her gloved hands still clutching the journal. "You have no idea what you're asking, Miss Dawson. Tabitha Dawson. Miss Dawson. My cabin's 10 miles from here, halfway up a mountain. It's one room, no luxuries. You'd be stuck there until spring with no company but me and my dog." "I understand," she said, though in truth she couldn't begin to imagine such an arrangement. "No, you don't," he said flatly, "but you will if you come. And I guarantee by the second week, you'll wish you'd turned back to Denver with Jenkins here." Tabitha straightened her spine. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. McCullough, but I've come too far to turn back now. If staying at your cabin until spring is my only chance of eventually reaching Ordway, then I accept your offer." "Wasn't an offer," he muttered, but his shoulders slumped slightly in resignation. "Get your things, then. We need to leave now if we're going to make it before dark." An hour later, Tabitha found herself perched on a sturdy mountain horse, following McCullough's lead through increasingly heavy snowfall. Her trunks had been lashed to a pack horse that McCullough led by a rope. The cold bit through her wool coat and city boots, and she could no longer feel her fingers despite the thick gloves. McCullough rode slightly ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure she was keeping pace. He hadn't spoken more than a dozen words since they'd left the trading post, and Tabitha was beginning to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. As if reading her thoughts, he reined his horse alongside hers. "Not too late to change your mind. Trading post is still within reach." Tabitha shook her head, snow gathering on the brim of her bonnet. "I'll manage, Mr. McCullough." "Mitchell," he corrected. "Or Mitch. Mr. McCullough will get old fast when there's only 2 of us." "Mitchell, then, and you may call me Tabitha." She hesitated. "How much farther?" "Another hour in good weather. With this snow, might be 2. Tabitha nodded, determined not to complain despite the cold seeping into her bones. As they continued their ascent, the trail narrowed, winding through dense pines laden with snow. The world had gone quiet except for the soft crunch of hooves and the occasional snort of the horses. The light was beginning to fade when Mitchell suddenly raised a hand, signaling a halt. "There," he said, pointing through the trees. Tabitha followed his gesture and saw a sturdy log cabin nestled against the mountainside. Smoke curled from a stone chimney and a small barn stood nearby. The sight of shelter, humble though it might be, nearly brought tears to her frozen cheeks. "You left a fire burning?" she asked, surprised. "No, that'll be Thomas. He checks in when I'm gone more than a day." As if on cue, the cabin door opened and a tall figure emerged, rifle in hand. Upon recognizing Mitchell, the man lowered his weapon and raised an arm in greeting. "Thomas is Apache," Mitchell explained as they approached. "Lives on the other side of the ridge with his family. Best tracker in these mountains." They rode into the small clearing before the cabin, and Thomas came forward to help them dismount. He was a striking man with sharp features and long hair tied back with a leather thong. He nodded respectfully to Tabitha but directed his words to Mitchell. "Storm is bad. Good you returned when you did. Thomas, this is Miss Tabitha Dawson. She'll be staying until the pass opens." Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly, but he made no comment on this unusual arrangement. Instead, he helped unload Tabitha's trunks while Mitchell led the horses to the barn. "I have prepared stew," Thomas said, his English precise though accented, "and brought extra supplies. The signs say this winter will be long." Tabitha thanked him, already dreading the months ahead. What had seemed like her only option at the trading post now loomed before her as an impossible situation. Trapped in a one-room cabin with a stranger who clearly preferred solitude. When Mitchell returned from tending the horses, Thomas took his leave, promising to return in a week if the weather allowed. As the door closed behind him, Tabitha stood awkwardly in the center of the cabin, taking in what would be her home for the unforeseeable future. It was indeed one room, though larger than she had feared. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area beside it. A rough-hewn table with two chairs sat in the center. Against the far wall was a large bed frame with a straw mattress, neatly made with wool blankets. Various shelves held supplies, tools, and, to her surprise, several books. A ladder led to a small loft space beneath the peaked roof. "You'll sleep up there," Mitchell said, following her gaze. "I put fresh straw in the mattress last month. Should be comfortable enough." "Thank you," she said, her voice small in the quiet cabin. Mitchell moved to the fireplace, stoking the flames and checking the stew Thomas had left simmering. A large dog Tabitha hadn't noticed before rose from a corner and padded over to greet him. "This is Bear," Mitchell said as the massive gray-brown animal turned curious eyes toward Tabitha. "He won't bother you if you don't bother him. He's quite large," Tabitha observed, trying not to show her nervousness. The dog looked to be part wolf, with intelligent eyes that seemed to assess her worth. "Half timber wolf, half whatever was passing through," Mitchell confirmed. "Best companion on the mountain, better than most people." The implication hung in the air between them. Tabitha removed her snow-dampened bonnet and coat, hanging them near the fire to dry. "I understand this is an imposition, Mitchell. I'll do my best not to disrupt your routine." He grunted in response, ladling stew into 2 wooden bowls. "Eat, then we'll sort out the rest." The stew was rich with venison and root vegetables, warming Tabitha from the inside out. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the occasional deep sigh from Bear, who had settled back in his corner. "I should explain my situation," Tabitha said finally, setting her empty bowl aside. "No need. Your business is your own. Nevertheless, I feel I owe you some explanation for invading your home for the winter." Mitchell studied her across the table, then nodded once, granting permission to continue. "My sister Alina moved west with her husband 3 years ago. She wrote often of the beauty here, the freedom." Tabitha's voice caught. "She taught at the school in Ordway until her illness made it impossible. Before Before she passed, she recommended me to take her place. I'm sorry for your loss, Mitchell said, his voice softer than it had been all day. Thank you. The position in Ordway represents a fresh start. My life in Boston had become untenable. She didn't elaborate on the broken engagement, the scandal, the whispers that followed her through drawing rooms and church pews. I've spent nearly everything I have to get here. Mitchell considered this. School board in Ordway's reasonable folk. If they know you're delayed by the pass closure, they might hold the position. I sent a telegram from the last proper town, but I haven't received any response. And now, with no way to communicate until spring. She trailed off, the reality of her situation sinking in fully for the first time. Mitchell rose and moved to a trunk in the corner. He rummaged for a moment before returning with a sheet of paper and a pencil. Write your message. Thomas goes to the settlement on the other side sometimes. They have telegraph lines to Denver. Can't promise when it'll get there, but it's better than nothing. Tabitha took the paper gratefully, composing a brief message explaining her circumstances and requesting the school board's patience until spring. When she finished, Mitchell folded the paper and placed it on a shelf by the door. I'll give it to Thomas when he returns, he said. For now, you should rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to make this work. Tabitha climbed the ladder to the loft, finding a small but clean space with the promised straw mattress, a wool blanket, and a small window that looked out on the snow-covered mountain. Mitchell had carried up one of her trunks, the one with her clothing, and positioned a small oil lamp nearby. As she changed into her nightgown, the enormity of her decision threatened to overwhelm her. 6 months in this isolated cabin with a man she'd just met. What would Alina say? What would anyone say? The impropriety alone was scandalous enough to ruin whatever reputation she had left. But as she lay down on the surprisingly comfortable mattress, listening to Mitchell moving quietly below, banking the fire for the night, she realized she had no choice. This was her path now, for better or worse. She would make the best of it, maintain her dignity and propriety, and come spring, she would continue to Ordway with her head held high. Tomorrow, she decided as sleep began to claim her, she would establish a routine. She would contribute to the household, keep to herself as much as possible in the confined space, and perhaps use the time to develop her teaching plans for when she finally reached Ordway. If she reached Ordway. The thought followed her into uneasy dreams of endless snow and mountain passes that never opened. The morning brought clarity, along with the realization that the small cabin was colder than Tabitha had imagined possible. Frost had formed on the inside of the loft window, creating delicate patterns that caught the early light. She dressed quickly, adding layers until she felt reasonably protected against the chill, then made her way carefully down the ladder. Mitchell was already awake, tending the fire and brewing coffee in a battered tin pot. Bear lay near the warmth, his eyes following Tabitha as she descended. "Sleep well?" Mitchell asked without turning. "Well enough, thank you," she replied, though in truth, she had woken several times, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings and the howling wind outside. "Storm's past for now," he said, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "Need to check traps and bring in more firewood. You'll want to stay inside today." Tabitha accepted the coffee, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm cup. "I'd like to help if I may. I can't sit idle for months." Mitchell gave her an appraising look. "City girl like you, what can you do?" The dismissive tone sparked something in Tabitha. "I may be from Boston, Mitchell, but I'm not helpless. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm a quick learner." A faint smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen. "We'll see. For today, stay put. Bear will keep you company." After a breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with honey, Mitchell dressed in his heavy coat, strapped on snowshoes and headed out with an axe and rifle. Tabitha watched through the window as he disappeared into the trees, a solitary figure against the vast whiteness. Left alone, she took stock of her surroundings more thoroughly. The cabin was rustic but well built, the chinks between logs carefully sealed against drafts. Various animal pelts hung from one wall: fox, rabbit, and what appeared to be beaver. Dried herbs and vegetables hung from the ceiling rafters, and a small shelf held basic medical supplies. The bookshelf caught her attention again. It contained an eclectic collection: several volumes on natural history, a worn Bible, a book of poetry by Walt Whitman, practical guides to trapping and wilderness survival, and surprisingly, a copy of Pride and Prejudice that looked well read. Tabitha smiled at this unexpected discovery. Perhaps there was more to the taciturn mountain man than she had assumed. She spent the morning organizing her belongings in the small loft space, then turned her attention to the cabin itself. Though reasonably tidy, it could use a woman's touch. She swept the plank floor, organized the cooking area, and took inventory of the food supplies stored in a small root cellar accessible through a trapdoor in the floor. By midday, Mitchell returned with an armload of firewood and 2 rabbits for their dinner. He paused in the doorway, surveying the changes to his cabin with an unreadable expression. "I hope you don't mind," Tabitha said. "I thought I should make myself useful." He nodded once, stomping snow from his boots. "Looks good, smells better." He gestured to a pot of beans she'd found and set to simmer with some of the dried herbs. "I wasn't sure when you'd return, so I started something simple." Mitchell set to work skinning the rabbits with practiced efficiency. Tabitha tried not to stare at the process, focusing instead on kneading dough for biscuits using the coarse flour she'd found. "Where'd you learn to cook?" Mitchell asked, breaking the silence. "My mother taught me the basics. After she passed, I kept house for my father and brothers until—" She hesitated. "Until circumstances changed." Mitchell didn't press for details. "These rabbits will make a good stew with those beans." They worked side by side, establishing an unexpected rhythm in the small space. Mitchell added the rabbit meat to the pot along with wild onions and carrots from the root cellar. Tabitha's biscuits baked in a cast iron skillet set in the coals. As they ate their meal that evening, the wind picked up again outside, whistling through the pines and rattling the cabin shutters. "Another storm coming," Mitchell observed. "Might be snowed in for a few days." "Does that happen often, this time of year? Every week or so? Why, I laid in supplies at the trading post yesterday." He took a bite of biscuit, nodding appreciatively. "These are good, better than mine." "Thank you." Tabitha felt an unexpected warmth at the simple compliment. "Mitchell, may I ask how long you've lived here?" He considered the question as if calculating. "Built this place 8 years ago, after the war. You fought in the rebellion, Union cavalry." "Wasn't much left for me back east afterward." He didn't elaborate, and Tabitha didn't push. "And you've been alone all this time?" Something flickered in his eyes, pain perhaps, or just wariness. "Me and Bear. Thomas and his family are nearby. Trading posts a half-day's ride in good weather." "It's enough." Tabitha wondered what had driven him to such isolation but respected his privacy. She had her own secrets after all. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds," Mitchell said, changing the subject, "I'll show you around. Things you should know if you're staying till spring." "I'd appreciate that." Later, as Tabitha prepared for bed, she heard Mitchell playing a harmonica softly by the fire. The melancholy tune floated up to the loft, a haunting sound against the backdrop of wind and occasional crackle of flames. It spoke of loneliness, of wide open spaces and long winters, of loss. She fell asleep to that sound, wondering about the man below who had so reluctantly opened his home to a stranger. Morning brought heavy snow as predicted, confining them to the cabin. Mitchell spent the day repairing traps and mending harnesses, while Tabitha organized her teaching materials and began planning lessons for her eventual students in Ordway. "What made you want to teach?" Mitchell asked as they shared lunch. Tabitha looked up from her notes. "I've always loved learning, sharing knowledge, and children. They see the world so clearly without the complications adults impose." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "Good teachers are rare out here. Towns fight over them. My sister wrote that the children in Ordway were eager to learn, despite limited resources." "Elena, right? I might have met her once or twice when I delivered furs to Ordway." Tabitha brightened. "You knew Elena, not well. Remember a teacher with that name. Folks spoke highly of her." The simple words meant more to Tabitha than elaborate condolences. "Thank you for telling me that." The day passed in companionable quiet, punctuated by practical conversations about cabin life and occasional anecdotes. Mitchell proved less taciturn than Tabitha had initially thought, especially when discussing the natural world around them. He described the changing seasons on the mountain, the animals that shared their territory, the rhythms of life at this altitude. By the third day of snowfall, however, the confinement was wearing on both of them. Mitchell paced the small space like a caged animal, while Tabitha found herself rereading the same paragraph in her book multiple times without absorbing the words. "Is it always this intense?" she finally asked. Mitchell paused his pacing. The snow, the feeling of being trapped. He looked at her with unexpected understanding. "First winter's the hardest. You get used to it or you go mad. How do you manage?" He gestured to the books, the harmonica, the half-carved piece of wood on the table. "Keep your hands busy. Your mind, too." The storm finally broke on the fourth day, revealing a transformed landscape. Snow had drifted against the cabin in places higher than the windows. Mitchell spent hours clearing paths to the barn and outhouse, while Tabitha ventured outside for the first time since their arrival. The cold took her breath away, but the beauty was undeniable. Sunlight sparkled on pristine snow, and the pines stood frosted like something from a fairy tale. The sky above was a blue so deep and clear it seemed impossible. "It's beautiful," she said when Mitchell returned from his labors. "Yes," he agreed, though his eyes lingered on her face rather than the landscape. He quickly looked away when she noticed. "Ready for that tour I promised." He showed her the barn where the horses were stabled, the smokehouse where meat was preserved, the small stream nearby, now frozen over, that provided water in warmer months, and the cache of firewood stacked against the cabin wall. "In winter, this is our world," he explained. "Everything we need within reach. Venture too far, you risk getting caught in a storm. Lose your bearings in whiteout conditions, you die." Tabitha nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of their situation. "What about your trapping lines?" "I check them when weather permits. Mostly concentrate on the closer ones in winter." As they circled back to the cabin, Mitchell pointed out animal tracks in the snow: rabbit, fox, deer. "Learn to read these, you learn to read the mountain." Tabitha studied the delicate impressions, fascinated by this new language. "Will you teach me?" Mitchell looked surprised by the request. "If you want to learn." "I do. I want to understand this place. If I'm to be here until spring, I should know how to. How to read the mountain, as you said." Something changed in Mitchell's expression, a softening around the eyes, perhaps. "Then I'll teach you." Over the next 2 weeks, a routine emerged. Mornings began early with fire tending and breakfast. Mitchell would check nearby traps if weather permitted, while Tabitha maintained the cabin and prepared meals. Afternoons might find them working side by side, Mitchell repairing equipment or treating furs, Tabitha mending clothing or developing her teaching plans. When cabin fever threatened, Mitchell would take her on short excursions, teaching her to identify plants even in their winter dormancy, to spot animal signs, to navigate using landmarks. Despite her city upbringing, Tabitha proved an apt pupil, her natural curiosity and quick mind impressing her reluctant host. Evenings were spent by the fire, sometimes in companionable silence, sometimes in conversation that grew increasingly comfortable. Mitchell spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the cavalry during the war, his decision to seek solitude in the mountains afterward. Tabitha shared stories of Boston, her family, her dreams of teaching. What she didn't share was the real reason she'd fled east. The engagement to Charles Whitfield, son of her father's business partner. His betrayal with her cousin. The humiliation when she'd broken the engagement, the accusations that followed, the doors that closed to her one by one. Some secrets were better kept, even in the intimate confines of a mountain cabin. Thomas visited twice, bringing news from the Apache settlement and taking Mitchell's furs to trade. He also carried Tabitha's message to the telegraph office, returning with word that it had been sent successfully. "No reply yet," he told them, "but lines down from Denver storm. Maybe next time." November slipped into December. The days grew shorter, the cold more intense. Snow continued to accumulate, transforming the landscape into an alien world of white drifts and blue shadows. One evening, as they sat before the fire, Mitchell watching Tabitha mend a tear in one of his shirts, he broke a comfortable silence. "Christmas is coming, 2 weeks or so." Tabitha looked up, needle paused mid-stitch. "I hadn't realized. The days blend together here. Usually don't mark it much myself, but thought you might want to." The consideration touched her. "That would be nice, though I don't know how we'd celebrate." Mitchell scratched Bear's ears thoughtfully. "Thomas's wife makes pine needle baskets. Could trade a fur for one. For you." The offer, so simply stated, caused an unexpected tightness in Tabitha's throat. "That's very kind, Mitchell," he shrugged, seemingly embarrassed by her gratitude. "Been thinking. If you're staying till spring, cabin should have some comforts." Later that night, as Tabitha lay in her loft bed listening to the wind, she reflected on the subtle changes in their relationship. The initial awkwardness had given way to a tentative friendship. Mitchell's gruff exterior had softened, revealing glimpses of a thoughtful, intelligent man beneath. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her with an expression she wasn't ready to name. The following day brought their first true disagreement. Mitchell announced his intention to check his furthest trapping line, a journey that would keep him away overnight. "Weather's clear. Won't get a better chance before the next storm," he explained over breakfast. "But Thomas said yesterday there were signs of another system moving in," Tabitha protested. "What if it arrives early? I know these mountains. I'll be fine." "You just told me last week that overconfidence gets people killed in winter." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "That was about tenderfeet, not experienced trappers. Even experienced men make mistakes," she persisted. "Is it worth the risk for a few pelts?" "It's how I make my living," he said shortly. "Can't stop working because it's cold." Tabitha set down her cup with more force than intended. "I'm not suggesting you stop working. I'm suggesting you wait until the weather is more predictable." "Been doing this for 8 years without your advice, Miss Dawson." The formal address stung after weeks of growing familiarity. "And I've been making decisions for myself for 24 years, Mr. McCullough, including the decision to worry about your safety." They glared at each other across the table at an impasse. Finally, Mitchell stood. "I'm going. Bear stays with you. Wood stacked by the door, plenty of food in the cellar. I'll be back tomorrow before sundown. He prepared quickly, ignoring Tabitha's concerned glances as he packed supplies and checked his rifle. When he was ready to depart, he paused at the door. If his voice caught, and he cleared his throat. If I'm not back by noon the day after tomorrow, fire 3 shots from the rifle. Thomas will hear it. Come check on you. The implicit acknowledgement of danger only heightened Tabitha's anxiety. Mitchell, please, take care of Bear, he said, and was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Tabitha spent the day in restless activity, cleaning the cabin more thoroughly than necessary, reorganizing supplies, anything to keep her mind occupied. Bear sensed her unease, following her movements with concerned eyes. By evening, snow had begun to fall again, lightly at first, then with increasing intensity. Tabitha stoked the fire higher than usual and placed a lantern in the window, a beacon should Mitchell return in darkness. She slept poorly, waking often to check the weather and listen for sounds of his return. By morning, several inches of new snow had fallen, and the wind had risen to a howl that rattled the cabin shutters. He should have waited, she told Bear, who whined in agreement. Stubborn, prideful man. The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Tabitha found herself at the window constantly, straining to see through the curtain of blowing snow. By mid-afternoon, visibility had dropped to mere feet beyond the porch. He won't travel in this, she reasoned aloud. He'll find shelter and wait it out. But as darkness fell with no sign of Mitchell, doubt crept in. What if he'd been caught in the open when the storm hit? What if he was lost or injured? Tabitha barely slept that night, dozing fitfully in Mitchell's chair by the fire, Bear at her feet. By dawn, the storm had begun to abate, though snow still fell steadily. Noon, she told Bear as she fed him. Mitchell said to wait until noon. The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. Tabitha paced, prayed, and peered out windows until her eyes ached from the glare of snow. When noon came and went with no sign of Mitchell, she faced the decision she'd been dreading. The rifle stood in the corner where he always kept it. Tabitha had never fired a gun before, but Mitchell had explained the basics one evening just in case, he'd said. Her hands trembled as she took it down, checked that it was loaded as he'd shown her. Outside, the cold hit her like a physical blow. She waded through snow nearly to her knees, making her way to the cleared area beside the cabin. Raising the rifle shakily, she fired 3 shots into the air, the recoil nearly knocking her backward. The reports echoed off the mountainside, then faded into silence. Tabitha returned to the cabin to wait, praying that Thomas would hear, would come quickly, that Mitchell was alive to be found. Hours passed. Tabitha kept the fire blazing and soup simmering, ready for whenever help or Mitchell might arrive. Bear grew increasingly restless, pacing and whining at the door. Just as the light began to fade, Bear suddenly barked and rushed to the window. Tabitha followed, heart pounding, and saw 2 figures approaching through the snow, one supporting the other. She flung open the door. Thomas was half dragging, half carrying Mitchell, whose face was alarmingly pale beneath his beard. Blood had frozen in a dark streak down one side of his face. Found him 2 miles out, Thomas said as they maneuvered Mitchell through the door. Fell into ravine. Lucky he climbed out before freezing. They eased Mitchell into his bed. He was conscious but dazed, his skin cold to the touch. While Thomas removed Mitchell's frozen boots and outer clothing, Tabitha heated water and gathered clean rags and the small box of medical supplies. Head wound not serious, Thomas assessed, cleaning away the blood to reveal a gash along Mitchell's temple. But very cold, need to warm slowly. Together they worked to raise Mitchell's body temperature, placing hot water bottles wrapped in cloth near his core, covering him with blankets, spooning warm broth between his bluish lips. Bear contributed by pressing his warm body against Mitchell's side, whining softly. "Was checking traps when storm came early," Mitchell mumbled, his words slurred with cold and exhaustion. "Tried to make it back, lost footing near the ridge." "Hush now," Tabitha said, pressing another spoonful of broth to his lips. "Rest. You're safe." Thomas stayed until Mitchell's color improved and he'd fallen into a natural sleep rather than the dangerous lethargy of hypothermia. "He will recover," he assured Tabitha. "But watch tonight. If fever comes, use willow bark tea from his supplies." After Thomas departed, promising to return the next day, Tabitha sat beside the sleeping Mitchell, her earlier anger transformed to profound relief. She gently bathed his face, noting the strong lines of his jaw beneath his beard, the fan of dark lashes against his cheeks. Without the barrier of his usual reserve, he looked younger, vulnerable. Her hand moved of its own accord to smooth back a lock of dark hair from his forehead, lingering perhaps longer than necessary. Mitchell stirred at her touch, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment confusion clouded his gaze, then recognition dawned. "Tabitha." "I'm here," she said softly. "You're home." His hand found hers, surprisingly strong despite his ordeal. "You were right. Shouldn't have gone." "SH, we can discuss that when you're stronger." But Mitchell persisted, his voice clearer now. "Need to say it. Pride nearly got me killed. You were right to worry." The admission, so at odds with his usual self-sufficiency, moved her deeply. "Rest now. I'll be here." His fingers tightened around hers before his eyes drifted closed again. Tabitha remained beside him, unwilling to break the connection, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest until she was certain he slept peacefully. Only then did she acknowledge the truth that had been growing within her, for weeks a truth crystallized by the fear of losing him. Somehow, against all expectation, she had begun to care for this solitary mountain man far more than was wise or proper. The realization should have alarmed her. Instead, sitting in the quiet cabin with his hand still clasped in hers, it felt like coming home. Mitchell recovered quickly, though Tabitha insisted he remain in bed for 2 days, tending to his needs with a mix of firm nursing and gentle care that brooked no argument. By the 3rd day, he was restless enough that she relented, allowing him to sit by the fire while she prepared their meals and maintained the cabin. "Not used to being waited on," he grumbled as she brought him coffee. "Consider it repayment for saving my life at the trading post," she replied. "If you hadn't offered shelter, I don't know what would have become of me." Mitchell's expression softened. "Would have done the same for anyone." "Would you?" Tabitha asked, settling into the chair opposite him. "Thomas mentioned you've never had a guest stay before." A faint flush colored Mitchell's cheeks above his beard. "Well, circumstances were different." "In what way?" He hesitated, seemingly searching for words. "You needed help. Couldn't leave you stranded." Tabitha sensed there was more he wasn't saying but didn't press. Since his return, something had shifted between them, an awareness, a tentative reaching toward connection neither was ready to name. As December progressed and Mitchell regained his strength, they settled into a new routine. He limited his trapping to areas closer to the cabin and always returned before dark. Tabitha continued to help with household tasks, but now also accompanied him on short excursions, learning more about surviving in this harsh but beautiful environment. One clear morning, Mitchell suggested they check snares he'd set for rabbits the previous day. Good day for it. No storms on the horizon. Tabitha bundled up in the warmer clothing Mitchell had procured for her through trades with Thomas fur-lined moccasins, wool leggings to wear beneath her skirts, a rabbit fur hat that covered her ears. They set out with Bear bounding ahead through the snow. The air was painfully crisp but still, the sky a perfect blue dome above the white-mantled pines. Their breath plumed before them as they walked, following a path Mitchell had broken earlier. "There's something I've been meaning to show you," Mitchell said as they checked the last empty snare. "Not far from here. Special place." He led her higher up the mountainside to a small clearing sheltered by towering pines. In the center stood a crude wooden cross, nearly hidden by snow. "My wife," Mitchell said softly. "Sarah, yellow fever took her our second year here." Tabitha's heart constricted. "Mitchell, I'm so sorry." Was a long time ago now, 6 years. He brushed snow from the cross, revealing carved initials. "She loved it here, the solitude, the beauty. After she passed, couldn't imagine living anywhere else." The revelation explained so much: his isolation, his initial reluctance to share his space, the sadness that sometimes shadowed his eyes. "Thank you for bringing me here," Tabitha said, "for sharing this with me." Mitchell nodded, his eyes on the simple marker. "Felt like you should know why I live as I do." They stood in silence for several moments, honoring the woman who had loved this mountain enough to make it her home, her final resting place. Then Mitchell gently took Tabitha's arm, guiding her back toward the trail. Getting colder, should head back. As they descended, Tabitha noticed Mitchell gathering pine boughs and holly berries. "For Christmas," he explained when he caught her curious glance. "Sarah always decorated, even up here. Thought you might like to." The gesture, so thoughtful and unexpected, warmed Tabitha more than any fire could have. "I would like that very much." Back at the cabin, they arranged the greenery along the mantel and around the windows, the bright red berries adding cheerful color to the rustic interior. Mitchell produced candles he'd been saving, placing them in holders made from deer antlers. "Perfect," Tabitha declared when they'd finished. "It feels like Christmas now." That evening, as they sat by the fire with cups of the strong coffee Mitchell preferred, he surprised her again. "Been thinking about Ordway." Tabitha looked up from her mending. "Oh, if the school doesn't hold your position, what will you do?" The question had haunted her during quiet moments. "I'm not certain. Return east, perhaps, though there's little waiting for me there." "Try another frontier town in need of a teacher." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "Ordway's a good place, growing, but there are other settlements nearby that need educators just as badly. Timber Creek, for instance." "Is that far from here?" "Half-day's ride in good weather." "Small community, but growing since the sawmill opened last year." Tabitha considered this. "Do they have a school?" "Building one now. Thomas's oldest boy helps with construction, says they're hoping for a teacher by spring." Hope flickered within her. "That's good to know." Mitchell seemed about to say more when Bear suddenly raised his head, ears pricked toward the door. A moment later they heard the crunch of footsteps in snow. "Thomas," Mitchell said, rising to open the door before their visitor could knock. But it wasn't Thomas who stood on the porch, shivering despite heavy winter clothing. It was a stranger, a well-dressed man of middle years with a trimmed beard and city boots ill-suited to mountain conditions. "Mitchell McCullough?" the man asked through chattering teeth. "That's me." "You're a long way from anywhere, Mr. James Dawson," the man replied, stamping his feet to restore circulation. "I'm looking for my daughter, Tabitha." Tabitha gasped, rising so quickly she dropped her sewing. "Father." James Dawson stepped into the cabin, his weathered face breaking into a relieved smile. "Tabitha, thank God. When we received your telegram about being stranded, Tabitha interrupted, moving forward to embrace her father despite her shock. "Your brothers and I, and Charles, of course." Tabitha stiffened at the name. "Charles is here, at the trading post. The proprietor suggested I come ahead with the local guide while Charles arranges for our return journey." James glanced around the cabin, taking in the close quarters with visible discomfort. "We've come to take you home, daughter." Mitchell had withdrawn to the far side of the room, his expression unreadable. "You'll want privacy," he said stiffly. "I'll check on the horses." Before Tabitha could respond, he had donned his coat and was out the door, leaving her alone with her unexpected visitor. "Father, sit by the fire before you freeze," she urged, guiding him to the chair Mitchell had vacated. "How on earth did you find me?" James Dawson accepted the cup of coffee she poured him, warming his hands around it. "Your telegram reached us in November. Said you were delayed by mountain weather, staying with a local guide until spring." His tone suggested he found the arrangement highly irregular. "Charles was concerned for your safety, your reputation, insisted we come at once." "Charles has no right to concern himself with anything regarding me," Tabitha said sharply. "Not after what he did." Her father sighed heavily. "Tabby, the boy made a mistake. He's been trying to make amends ever since you left." "A mistake? He was engaged to me while carrying on with cousin Margaret." Margaret threw herself at him. "Charles was weak, but he's repented. He broke things off with her immediately after you discovered them." James reached for his daughter's hand. "He still wants to marry you, Tabby. He's traveled across the country to prove it." Tabitha withdrew her hand, anger flaring. "And you brought him here, without consulting me." "I thought once you saw him, remembered the advantages of the match, advantages. Like being tied to a man I can never trust, living with the whispers, the pity." Tabitha paced the small room, Bear watching her anxiously from his corner. "I came west to start anew, father, to build a life of my own making." James looked around the cabin dubiously. "In a one-room shack with a mountain man." "Tabitha, be reasonable. What future is there in that?" The question struck closer to Tabitha's hidden thoughts than she cared to admit. What future indeed? Her feelings for Mitchell had grown steadily, but she had no indication he felt the same. He had been kind, protective, even tender at times, but that might be nothing more than decency toward a stranded traveler. "Mr. McCullough has been a perfect gentleman," she said finally. "And my arrangements are temporary until the pass opens." James softened, patting the chair beside him. "I know you've had a difficult time, daughter, but there's no need to remain here until spring. We've hired experienced guides with proper equipment. We can leave for Denver tomorrow, be home by the new year." "Home," Tabitha echoed, the word suddenly hollow. Boston no longer felt like home. This cabin, for all its rustic simplicity, had begun to feel more like home than any place she'd known since childhood. "Your mother's sister has been asking for you," James continued, pressing what he perceived as an advantage. "And the Whitfields have kept your teaching position at their academy open. You could resume your life as if this adventure never happened. But it did happen, father, and I'm not the same person who left Boston." Tabitha moved to the window, looking out at the snowy landscape that had become familiar, even beloved. "I need time to think." "Of course," James conceded, though his expression suggested he considered the decision already made. "We'll stay at the trading post tonight. Our guides say we should leave by midday tomorrow if we're to make good progress before the next storm." When Mitchell returned an hour later, James had departed for the trading post, promising to return the next morning with Charles. Tabitha sat by the fire, her mind in turmoil. Mitchell hung his coat by the door, his movements deliberate. "Your father seems concerned for your welfare." "He's concerned for appearances," Tabitha corrected, "and for the business merger my marriage to Charles would secure." Mitchell paused in the act of pouring coffee. "Marriage?" "The engagement I broke before leaving Boston, the one he apparently still considers active." Tabitha couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "They've come to take me back." Mitchell's face betrayed nothing, though his knuckles whitened around his cup. Will you go? The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Tabitha rose, moving to stand before him. Do you want me to go, Mitchell? His eyes met hers, blue and deep as the winter sky. What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me. For a long moment he said nothing, the struggle visible in his face. Then, no, I don't want you to go. The simple admission broke something open between them. Tabitha took a step closer. Why? Mitchell set down his cup, his hands coming to rest lightly on her shoulders. Because in these few weeks, you've brought life back to this cabin, to me. His voice roughened. I've been half alive since Sarah died, didn't know it until you came. Tabitha's heart thundered in her chest. I wasn't looking for this, for you, but now I can't imagine walking away. Your father's right about one thing, Mitchell said, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her shoulders. What future could I offer you? I'm a trapper, a recluse. You're educated, refined, deserve better. Shouldn't I decide what I deserve? Tabitha asked, placing her palm against his bearded cheek. What I want, Mitchell's breath caught. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he lowered his head until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, then deepening as Tabitha responded, her arms circling his neck. When they finally parted, Mitchell rested his forehead against hers. If you stay, he murmured, it wouldn't be just until spring. Need you to understand that. I do understand, Tabitha whispered back, and I'm not afraid. Mitchell stepped back slightly, taking her hands in his. Your father, the man he's brought with him, they'll try to persuade you. Yes. And there's the school in Ordway, your sister's position. Tabitha had almost forgotten her original purpose in coming west, so completely had her focus shifted. There are other schools, she said, remembering his earlier words. In Timber Creek, perhaps? A smile touched Mitchell's lips. Perhaps. That night, Tabitha slept little, her mind replaying the kiss, the declarations, the decision before her. By dawn, she knew her heart, though doubts still whispered at the edges of her certainty. Mitchell was quieter than usual as they prepared breakfast, respecting her need to think. Whatever you decide, he said as they cleaned up afterward, I won't stand in your way. Tabitha touched his arm. I know. The sound of approaching horses reached them before Bear's warning bark. Mitchell opened the door to find James Dawson, accompanied by a handsome young man Tabitha recognized with a jolt of distaste. Charles, she acknowledged coolly as the men entered. Charles Whitfield removed his hat, revealing golden hair and the charming smile that had once captivated her. Tabitha, you're a sight for sore eyes. He stepped forward as if to embrace her, but Tabitha retreated, positioning herself noticeably closer to Mitchell. Charles's smile faltered, his eyes darting between them with sudden comprehension. Mr. McCullough, James said, oblivious to the undercurrents, we're indebted to you for sheltering my daughter. Now that we've arranged safe passage back to civilization, we won't impose further on your hospitality. Mitchell's face was impassive. Miss Dawson is welcome here for as long as she chooses to stay. Charles's expression hardened. Surely you don't mean to suggest that Tabitha would choose this. Primitive existence over returning to her family and position in Boston. That's for her to say, Mitchell replied evenly. All eyes turned to Tabitha. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Father, Charles, I appreciate your concern and the effort you've made to come here. But I won't be returning to Boston. James stared at his daughter in disbelief. Tabitha, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. For perhaps the first time in my life, I'm choosing my own path. She moved to stand beside Mitchell. I came west to teach, to honor Alina's memory, to start anew. Those goals haven't changed. But surely not here, Charles protested, gesturing dismissively at the cabin. Not with him. Tabitha felt Mitchell tense beside her but kept her focus on Charles. My arrangements are not your concern. Our engagement ended the moment I found you with Margaret." "A momentary weakness," Charles insisted. "One I've regretted every day since." "Perhaps, but it showed me the truth of our relationship, a business merger dressed up as a romance." Tabitha softened her tone, addressing her father. "I'm not abandoning my family, Father. I'm building a life that has meaning to me. I'll write often, visit when possible." James Dawson looked from his daughter to Mitchell, resignation gradually replacing anger. "You're certain this is what you want?" "I am." Charles wasn't ready to concede. "And what of your reputation?" "Living unchaperoned with a man in these conditions, that concern is easily addressed," Mitchell interrupted, his deep voice cutting through Charles's objections. He turned to Tabitha, taking her hands. "If you're staying, marry me, not just for appearances, because I love you." The declaration, spoken so plainly before witnesses, stole Tabitha's breath. "Mitchell, don't have a ring," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "Don't have much at all except this mountain, this life. But it's yours if you want it, if you want me." In that moment, the doubts that had plagued Tabitha throughout the night vanished like morning mist. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I'll marry you." James Dawson cleared his throat, clearly struggling with the turn of events. "Tabitha, marriage is a serious step. You barely know this man. Sometimes 2 months can reveal more about a person's character than years of formal courtship," Tabitha replied. "I know what matters: Mitchell's kindness, his integrity, his strength. The rest we'll discover together." Charles's face had flushed an angry red. "This is absurd. You can't possibly prefer this trapper to what I can offer you." "Yet I do," Tabitha said simply. James, seeing the determination in his daughter's face, sighed deeply. "I see there's no dissuading you. When is this wedding to take place?" Mitchell and Tabitha exchanged glances. "As soon as possible," Mitchell answered. "The circuit judge visits the Trading Post monthly. Due next week if the weather holds." "Then we shall stay until then," James decided, surprising everyone. "I may not understand your choice, Tabitha, but I won't miss my daughter's wedding." Charles made a sound of disbelief. "James, you can't be serious. She's made her decision, Charles. We should respect it." James extended his hand to Mitchell. "It seems I'll be calling you son soon enough, McCullough." Mitchell shook the offered hand, a simple gesture that bridged worlds. "I'll do right by her, sir. You have my word. See that you do." James turned back to his daughter. "Now, where will Charles and I be staying until this wedding?" "Not at that Trading Post, I hope. The accommodations are rather basic." Tabitha bit back a smile at her father's understatement. "Thomas and his family might have space." "Mitchell, do you think they would mind?" Thomas's wife would welcome the company. "Their home is more comfortable than here, built in the Apache style, but with influences from the mission where she was raised." The following days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Thomas's family indeed welcomed James and a sullen Charles into their home. Charles made one last attempt to persuade Tabitha to return east, cornering her outside the Trading Post with promises of forgiveness and restoration of her social position. "I don't need forgiveness, Charles," she told him firmly. "Nor do I miss the society that was so quick to condemn me for breaking our engagement while excusing your infidelity. That McCullough fellow has turned your head with frontier romance," Charles scoffed. "You'll regret this when the novelty wears off and you're left with the harsh reality of life in these mountains." "Perhaps, but it will be my choice, my life, my consequences." Tabitha stepped around him. "I wish you well, Charles, truly, but my future lies here." Charles departed the next morning, unwilling to witness the wedding. James stayed, gradually warming to Mitchell as he observed the trapper's obvious devotion to Tabitha and the respect he commanded among the scattered mountain community. The wedding took place at the trading post a week later, with Judge Harrington officiating. Thomas and his family attended, along with the trading post owner and a handful of trappers and settlers from the area. Tabitha wore her best dress, the blue merino, while she'd saved for her arrival in Ordway with pine sprigs in her hair. Mitchell had traded his finest furs for a new shirt and had trimmed his beard for the occasion. As they exchanged vows before the judge, Tabitha saw in his eyes all the love and commitment she could ever want. "I, Mitchell James McCullough, take you, Tabitha Elizabeth Dawson, to be my lawful wedded wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." When Tabitha repeated the vows, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The doubts, the fears, the uncertainty of the future all faded beside the certainty of their love. Judge Harrington pronounced them husband and wife, and Mitchell kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The small gathering cheered, and even James Dawson was seen to wipe away a suspicious moisture from his eyes. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Thomas's wife had prepared a feast of venison, corn bread, and dried berry pies. Someone produced a fiddle, and dancing continued until the early winter dusk necessitated departure before darkness made the mountain trails treacherous. James embraced his daughter as they said their goodbyes. "I still think you're mad," he murmured, "but I've never seen you look so happy." "I am happy, Father, happier than I've ever been." "Then I'm content." He turned to Mitchell. "Take care of my girl, McCullough." "With my life," Mitchell promised. As they rode back to the cabin, their home twilight painted the snow-covered pines in shades of rose and gold. Bear bounded ahead, his dark form a moving shadow against the whiteness. "No regrets?" Mitchell asked, his horse walking close beside hers. Tabitha reached across to take his hand. "None, and you?" "Only that Sarah can't know you. She'd have liked you." The simple statement, offered without jealousy or reservation, touched Tabitha deeply. "I wish I could have known her too." At the cabin, Mitchell lifted Tabitha from her horse and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing at the formality in a place that had already become their shared home weeks before. Inside, they found the space transformed. Thomas's family had come ahead during the ceremony, decorating the cabin with pine boughs, candles, and strings of dried berries. A special dinner waited by the fire, and the bed had been made up with fresh linens. "Welcome home, Mrs. McCullough," Mitchell said softly. Tabitha smiled up at her husband. "I've been home since the day you took me in from the snow." As winter deepened, Tabitha and Mitchell settled into married life with a naturalness that surprised them both. The close quarters that might have bred contempt instead fostered intimacy, not just physical but emotional. They learned each other's rhythms, preferences, the small gestures that conveyed affection or needed space. Mitchell taught Tabitha more about tracking, trapping, preserving food, all the skills needed to thrive in their mountain home. She, in turn, brought organization to his record-keeping, introduced new recipes using their limited ingredients, and read aloud in the evenings from their small but growing library. Thomas visited regularly, sometimes bringing his wife Maria and their children. From Maria, Tabitha learned traditional Apache medicines, basket weaving, and beadwork to embellish the moccasins and garments they made from deer and rabbit hides. James Dawson wrote monthly, his letters making their way to the trading post whenever weather permitted. At first, his correspondence focused on persuading Tabitha to reconsider her wilderness exile, as he called it. Gradually, his tone shifted to one of grudging acceptance, then genuine interest in her new life. Christmas came, transforming the snowy mountain into a place of beauty and reflection. Mitchell presented Tabitha with a writing desk he'd crafted in secret, working on it during her afternoon naps. "It's beautiful," she marveled, running her fingers over the polished pine surface inlaid with darker woods. "When did you find time?" "Been working on it since November," he admitted. Thomas helped with the inlay. Tabitha's gift to Mitchell was a new harmonica to replace his worn one, obtained through a complex trading arrangement with Maria that had involved Tabitha's pearl earrings and considerable negotiation. "Play for me," she requested as they sat before the fire that night, the cabin glowing with candlelight and pine scent. Mitchell took the new instrument, testing its tone before launching into a melody. Tabitha recognized the melancholy tune she'd heard that first night in the cabin. Now, however, it seemed less sorrowful, more contemplative. "What's it called?" she asked when he finished. "Sarah used to call it Mountain Song, made it up our first winter here." He looked down at the harmonica, then back at Tabitha with a soft smile. "Think it needs a new verse now." The tune he played next held the same mountain theme, but transformed lighter, hopeful, with an undercurrent of joy that brought tears to Tabitha's eyes. January brought the deepest cold and most relentless storms. For nearly 2 weeks, they were completely snowed in, unable to check traps or visit neighbors. They passed the time with games of checkers using pieces Mitchell carved from firewood, reading aloud from their books, and telling stories from their lives before they met. It was during this confinement that Tabitha realized she was with child. The early signs had been easy to dismiss amid the excitement of the wedding and holidays, but as January ended, there was no denying her condition. She told Mitchell one evening as they lay in bed, the cabin dark except for the dying fire's glow. "A baby," he repeated, propping himself on one elbow to look down at her. "You're certain?" "As certain as one can be without a doctor's confirmation. The child should arrive in late summer, I think." Mitchell's hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach, wonder in his touch. "A baby," he said again, this time with growing excitement. "Our baby." The joy in his voice dispelled any lingering concerns Tabitha might have had about bringing a child into their remote existence. "Are you pleased then?" "Pleased?" Mitchell gathered her close. "Tabitha, you've given me back a future I thought was lost forever, a family." His voice roughened with emotion. "Can't imagine a greater gift." February brought milder weather and news from Timber Creek via Thomas. The school building was complete, and the town council was actively seeking a teacher for the spring term. "Told them about you," Thomas informed Tabitha during one of his visits. "They are very interested, especially when I mentioned your experience from Boston." Mitchell looked to Tabitha. "Would you want that? Teaching at Timber Creek. It's not as big as Ordway, but it's growing." The prospect of fulfilling her original purpose in coming west while remaining close to their mountain home appealed strongly. "I would, at least until the baby comes." "School board wants to meet you," Thomas continued, "when pass clears enough for travel to Valley." "That would be wonderful," Tabitha said. Then, with a glance at her still flat abdomen, "though they might have reservations about employing a teacher in my condition." Thomas's wife, Maria, smiled knowingly. The midwife in Timber Creek taught for many years, had 7 children. They will understand. As February melted into March, signs of spring began to appear even as snow still blanketed the higher elevations. Birds returned to the pines, their songs greeting each dawn. Patches of ground emerged near the cabin where the sun hit strongest. Tabitha's condition became more noticeable, her dresses requiring adjustment to accommodate her changing figure. Mitchell watched these changes with a mixture of pride and protectiveness, insisting she rest more and taking over the heavier household tasks. "I'm carrying a child, not suffering an illness." she protested one afternoon when he forbade her from helping to repair the barn roof. "Humor me," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Never done this before being an expectant father." She relented, using the extra time to develop teaching plans for the Timber Creek School and to start a small journal for their child, recording the events leading to his or her birth. By early April, the mountain pass had cleared enough for careful travel. Mitchell and Tabitha made the journey to Timber Creek, where the school board enthusiastically offered her the teaching position starting in May. "Will only be a dozen students to start," explained Mrs. Holloway, the board president. "Ages 6 to 14, various levels of prior education. That's similar to what I expected in Ordway," Tabitha replied. "I've prepared flexible lessons to accommodate different abilities." "And your condition?" asked another board member, a shopkeeper named Reynolds. "Our child is due in August," Tabitha said calmly. "I would need a substitute for the final weeks of the summer term and perhaps the beginning of autumn." Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. "My daughter completed normal school last year. She can step in when necessary." The matter settled, they discussed salary and housing. The school included a small teacherage, a two-room cabin adjacent to the schoolhouse. However, when Tabitha explained their situation, the board agreed she could commute from Mitchell's cabin during good weather and use the teacherage only when necessary. "Mountain's only an hour's ride from town," Mitchell pointed out. "I'll bring her down each morning, collect her afternoons. When winter comes again, or the baby makes travel difficult, she can stay in town during the week." The arrangement struck everyone as sensible, if unusual. Tabitha left the meeting with a signed contract and a list of expected students, her heart light with the prospect of fulfilling both her professional ambitions and personal happiness. As they rode back up the mountain that afternoon, Mitchell reached across to take her hand. "Proud of you. Knew you'd impress them." Tabitha squeezed his fingers. "It seems we can have everything we want: our home, our family, my teaching. I never imagined such happiness when I boarded that stagecoach last fall." "Funny how things work out," Mitchell mused. "If the pass hadn't closed early, you'd have made it to Ordway, never would have met. Perhaps fate had other plans for us. Perhaps," Mitchell smiled at his wife, "or perhaps Thomas was right all along." "About what?" "When he first heard about you staying with me for the winter. Said he'd seen it in a dream, the mountain bringing us together, keeping us together." Tabitha laughed softly. "Then I'm grateful to the mountain, and to Thomas's dreams. May brought full spring to the mountains, transforming their world. Wildflowers carpeted meadows, streams ran full with snowmelt, and the forest teemed with new life." Tabitha began teaching at the Timber Creek School, quickly winning the respect of her students and their parents with her gentle authority and innovative methods. Mitchell expanded his trapping territory now that the snow had receded, but always arranged his schedule to accompany Tabitha to and from the school. Often he would hunt or check traps in the area while she taught, then join her for the journey home. Their cabin underwent transformations as well. Mitchell added a small second room for the baby, furnished with a cradle he carved from pine, and a rocking chair traded from a family moving west. Tabitha planted a kitchen garden near the cabin, growing herbs and hardy vegetables that would supplement their diet. As summer approached and Tabitha's pregnancy advanced, they made arrangements for the final weeks of the school term. Mrs. Holloway's daughter, Emily, observed Tabitha's teaching methods to prepare for substituting. "You've done wonders with these children," Emily commented after one such day. "Even the Harper boys are reading now, and they swore they never would." Tabitha smiled, gathering her teaching materials as the last students departed. "They simply needed the right motivation. Stories about mountain men and explorers seemed to hold their attention better than the standard primers. Mitchell arrived to escort her home, and Emily watched with undisguised curiosity as the gruff trapper transformed into a solicitous husband, helping Tabitha with her things and asking detailed questions about her day. "You two are not what I expected," Emily admitted as they prepared to leave. "What did you expect?" Tabitha asked, amused. "When I heard a Boston schoolteacher had married Mitchell McCullough and was living on the mountain, well, everyone assumed it was some kind of desperate arrangement, that you'd be miserable." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "And now," Emily blushed, "now I think you might be the happiest couple I've ever seen." The observation stayed with Tabitha as they rode home that evening. Perhaps their happiness was all the more precious for being unexpected, unplanned, a gift from the mountain that had first seemed a prison and had become their sanctuary. August arrived with blazing heat in the valleys but pleasant warmth at their elevation. Tabitha had completed the school term and now spent her days preparing for the baby's arrival. Maria visited often, bringing gifts of soft deerskin clothing and sharing wisdom about childbirth and infant care. "Baby strong," she pronounced, her hands gentle on Tabitha's rounded abdomen. "Not long now." Mitchell grew increasingly attentive, rarely venturing far from the cabin. He finished the last improvements to the baby's room, built a pen for the milk goat he'd traded for, and generally hovered until Tabitha laughingly banished him to the porch. "Go play your harmonica," she told him one particularly hot afternoon. "The baby and I need to nap without you asking if we need anything every 5 minutes," he grinned sheepishly. "Can't help worrying. I know, and I love you for it, but we're fine, truly." The baby arrived 2 days later, a boy with his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair. The birth was swift by most standards, though to Mitchell, pacing outside while Maria and her sister attended Tabitha, it seemed an eternity. When finally Maria called him in, he found Tabitha propped up in bed, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Mitchell approached almost reverently, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. The infant was tiny, perfect, his little face screwed up in what might have been concentration or displeasure at having been evicted from his comfortable quarters. "A son," Mitchell whispered, reaching out to touch one miniature hand. The baby's fingers instantly curled around his father's calloused index finger, holding with surprising strength. "Strong grip. Going to be a fine trapper one day. Or a teacher," Tabitha suggested with a smile. "Or both. He'll have choices we didn't have." "What shall we call him?" Mitchell asked, unable to take his eyes off the child. "I was thinking William after my father and James after yours." "William James McCullough." Mitchell tested the name. "Good, strong name, but he'll need a mountain name too. Something the Apache would recognize." Maria, who had been quietly gathering her birthing supplies, spoke up. "His spirit animal will show itself in time. For now he is Mascona Strong Wind, born in the season when the winds shift, bringing change." "Mascona," Mitchell repeated. "I like that." They called him William or Will, but Mitchell sometimes used the Apache name when they were alone in the forest, teaching their son the ways of the mountain as he grew. And grow he did, thriving in the clear mountain air. By his first birthday, Will was walking unsteadily around the cabin, getting into everything. By his second, he was chattering in a mixture of English and Apache words learned from his frequent playmates, Thomas's grandchildren. Tabitha continued teaching at the Timber Creek School, bringing Will with her when he was old enough. The arrangement worked. Well, Mitchell would bring them down the mountain in the morning, often staying to help with building projects in the growing settlement, before collecting his family in the afternoon. During the harshest winter months, Tabitha and Will stayed in the teacherage during the week, with Mitchell joining them when possible. These separations, though brief, only strengthened their bond, each reunion a celebration of the life they'd built together. In Will's third summer, Tabitha discovered she was expecting their second child. The news brought joy to the small household and excited speculation from Will about whether he would have a brother or sister. "Sister," he declared firmly one evening as the family sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant peaks. "I want sister," Mitchell chuckled, tousling the boy's dark hair. "Might not get to choose, son." "Thomas says it's sister. He dreamed it." Tabitha exchanged an amused glance with her husband. Thomas's dreams had acquired near-mythic status in their household, given how accurately he had predicted their own union. "Well, we shall see if Thomas is right again," she said diplomatically. The second birth came in late winter, with snow piled high around the cabin. This time, Mitchell insisted they travel to Timber Creek well in advance, taking no chances with mountain weather. The town now boasted a proper doctor, and the birth took place in the comfort of the teacherage, with both medical and traditional assistance. Thomas was indeed correct. A daughter joined the McCullough family, a tiny girl with Tabitha's delicate features and a dusting of reddish hair that surprised them both. "Eleanor," Mitchell suggested when Tabitha asked his preference for a name, "after your sister who brought you west." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes at the thoughtful gesture. "Eleanor it is. Eleanor Sarah McCullough." Maria named the infant Kamama butterfly, saying she had come to them on silent wings, bringing beauty. As their family grew, so did Timber Creek. By the time Will was 6 and ready to start school officially, the settlement had nearly tripled in size. A small newspaper office opened, along with a proper general store, a church, and even a hotel for travelers crossing the mountains. Mitchell adapted to these changes with surprising grace, expanding his business from trapping to include guiding hunting parties and leading supply expeditions over the mountain passes he knew so intimately. His reputation for reliability and knowledge of the terrain made him sought after, particularly as tourism to the region increased. Tabitha's school grew as well, eventually requiring an additional teacher to handle the expanding enrollment. She assumed the position of headmistress, overseeing curriculum while continuing to teach the older students. They added 2 more rooms to the cabin as the years passed, a larger kitchen and a dedicated space for the children. The original one-room structure remained the heart of their home, however, with the fireplace that had witnessed their early days together still warming them through mountain winters. 10 years after Tabitha had been stranded by the early closure of Eagle Pass, she stood with Mitchell on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the autumn sunshine. Will, now a lanky 9-year-old with his father's quiet competence, was teaching Eleanor to use a small bow Mitchell had crafted for her 6th birthday. Their youngest, 4-year-old Matthew, sat nearby, solemnly whittling a stick under Bear's watchful gaze. A new Bear, son of the original, but with the same protective instincts toward the McCullough children. "Penny for your thoughts," Mitchell said, slipping an arm around Tabitha's waist. She leaned into him, savoring the solid strength that had been her constant for a decade. "I was thinking about that day at the trading post. How terrified I was when they told me the pass was closed." "Best piece of bad news I ever got," Mitchell replied, dropping a kiss on her temple. "Though I didn't know it at the time. Nor I." Tabitha turned in his arms to face him. "I came west seeking a new beginning, but I never imagined finding a life so rich, so full of purpose and love." Mitchell's eyes, still as blue as the mountain sky but now crinkled at the corners from years of outdoor living, gazed down at her with unwavering devotion. No regrets, then, about the life you might have had in Ordway or Boston. Tabitha smiled, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. Not one. This mountain, this life there exactly where I belong, where we belong together. As if to punctuate her words, Eleanor's delighted laugh rang out as her arrow found its target. Will's proud instruction to his sister floated across to them, while little Matthew abandoned his whittling to applaud the achievement. Mitchell and Tabitha stood together, watching their children, the family that had begun with a mountain pass closed too soon, and a winter that changed everything. Above them, the pines whispered their ancient songs, and the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, not a barrier now, but a blessing, a reminder of how their love had bloomed when the world outside went white and still. The mountain that had once seemed to imprison Tabitha had given her the greatest freedom of all, the freedom to discover her true self, her true home, her true love. A love as enduring as the peaks themselves, weathering all seasons, growing stronger with each passing year. A love born of necessity, perhaps, but sustained by choice, their choice every day to build this life together, one season at a time.